Hello, project people. You're listening to the Project Chatter podcast, your trusted source of project experts. I am your host, Val Matthews, and I am joined by my co-host, Mr. Dale Fung.
Hello, Val. Before we get into this, it's your birthday coming up soon, isn't it?
Stop it. Stop it. I told you no.
You told me no. You didn't even bring cake to this one. I'm disappointed.
Not this yet. Next time.
Next time.
My friend.
Okay, we'll have to wait a year, but happy birthday for the upcoming one. But yeah, hello folks. It's great to be on another podcast. We have a very, very exciting lineup and topic today, so I'm keen to get into this one.
I'm with you, mate. And we've got two guests today, so I'm very excited to get into this. But just a reminder before we get into it for our listeners to hit that subscribe button on whichever platform you listen to your good podcasts on. Or if you like video, check out our YouTube channel for the full podcast and our guest bonus Q&A. And if you'd like to sponsor the podcast, check out us or get in touch with us at projectchatterpodcast.com. Let's get on with it. In this pod, we are joined by our good friend, Nat Moyes. Welcome back. And Richard Palczynski. And we're going to talk about Crossrail, or what we can talk about, and systems that work. Hi, Richard and Nat. Welcome to the show.
Hi.
Got blown away by the introduction. We are happy to have you guys on. Obviously, Nat, we've had you on before. Richard, welcome to the show for the first time. Before we get into, I think Dale's going to do a little bit of a bio, and then we'll get stuck into Crossrail.
I am, Val. So it's a great bio, but we will get stuck into it. So Rich, you're up first. So Richard joined Arcadis in February 2019. Throughout his career, he has collected both hands-on program management experience after working on major programs such as the Jubilee Line Extension, HS1, West Coast Mainline and Crossrail, where he was Program Controls Director. In his latest role, he is supporting Network Rail's Transpennine Route Upgrade Program, a multi-billion-pound enhancement scheme stretching from Manchester to York. Richard has also collected 6 years in the corporate world, helping to run, grow, and evolve companies such as Parsons Brinckerhoff, Balfour Beatty, and Mace. He is a fellow with the Institution of Civil Engineers and the APM, and is a supervising civil engineer, passionate about skiing and triathlon. Awesome. Rich, as Val says, it's great to have you on the pod. How are you feeling?
Yeah, pretty good. Thank you.
Good. It's great to have you. Nat, we've had you on before. Welcome back. Episode 29. It was a full-on podcast. We have the full bio there. So folks, go back to episode 29, listen to that. But a quick short snapshot of that bio. Nat Moyes has 12 years at the same software company, which is starting to become a rarity. That's probably 13 by now, because we spoke to you last year. But that is Nat's tenure at Deltek, supporting their PPM products and clients. She's seen a lot of industry change, and I'm sure you have over the past year as well, Nat. And she's had the privilege to support a number of established clients as well as grow some new ones. She's been involved with the APM SIG, steering committees, user groups, and general advisory boards, all focused on people, process, and toolset. Welcome back, Nat. How are you feeling?
Yeah, good, thank you. So I had so much fun last time. I've now brought a far more educated friend to join us on this pod.
Don't be silly. Don't be silly. We had lots of fun and lots of insight from you last time, and I'm sure people are going to go back straight after this podcast and listen to episode 29 in full color. But let's get into it. Crossrail, and when we posted this on the various social networks, there was quite a bit of a interest in Crossrail, and particularly from our UK audience. But just, I guess, Rich, if I come to you first to sort of give a bit of a background of Crossrail and why it's been in the news, perhaps for some of the wrong reasons, and why there's so much interest, particularly for those listeners that perhaps are based in North America and Australasia, just to sort of set the scene as to why such an interest in Crossrail.
Okay, so for a while, Crossrail was the biggest game in town, right? It started, it actually went back decades, but it finally got the go-ahead in 2008. It was a 10-year scheme to essentially build a brand new railway from way out in the west of London, near Reading, to then come across London, then dive underground, plant 9 new stations underneath the main capital, and then out into the service again and up to Shenfield in the sort of northeast arm of London. It's a full-sized overground railway that runs underground. So for those that go on the tube network, you know, everyone's used to the tube running in all different directions. Crossrail is literally 2 or 3 times the size of the tube. I mean, it's colossal. And when people see when they experience it for the first time, they'll be absolutely blown away by it. The reason why we ended up in the news, I think in simple terms, for so long, we were touted as the £15 billion railway that was running on time and on budget. Our completion date was December 2018, and in August 2018, unfortunately, the programme had to announce to everyone that it was not going to make that opening date. There are a whole myriad of reasons behind that. But, you know, why does Crossrail get such bad press? To be fair, you know, I understand that receiving such bad news so sort of late in the day when the programme had said for so long that it was on time and on budget was a real letdown to the people living in London. And we've never been able to sort of live it down since. I left the programme at the end of 2018. My contract on Crossrail was the first contract I've ever had where I knew the end date when I started on the job. I will say that the near 4 years I had on Crossrail were the best 4 years of my career to date. It is a fantastic scheme, and I will argue passionately with anybody that wants to call Crossrail a failure. You know, Crossrail is currently looking to open its doors to paying members of the public in early 2022, so there's still a year to go. But, you know, by any standard, you know, a mega programme that is delivering not just a brand new railway line under the world's, you know, arguably busiest city, not just delivering brand new trains, but trains that for the first time are interfacing with 3 separate signalling systems. That's simply never been done before. And at the end of the day, you know, the £15 billion railway is going to get delivered for, I don't know, 19, 20 billion pounds. I don't know what the current numbers are today, but, you know, do the basic maths, that's 30% over budget. And it's, you know, it was a 10-year programme that is going to be delivered 3-something years late, 30% longer on schedule. You know, I can look at other major programs around that have, you know, doubled, quadrupled in size. And, you know, you just cannot call Crossrail a failure. And I think it's going to be like any other of these major programs. You talked about schemes that I worked on, High Speed 1, Jubilee Line Extension, West Coast Mainline, you know, all very late, all over budget. But, you know, once those doors open and people start realising the benefits of the scheme, then they will just fall in love with Crossrail.
And all will be forgotten.
And hopefully all will be forgotten. You know? There you go. That's Crossrail in a nutshell.
No, that is brilliant. And thank you for giving us the background there. And, you know, you add in some of the politics around all of it as well, you know, that was going on. And it sounds like a really simple project to deliver. Nothing complex or complicated about it. But jokes aside, I really appreciate your passion there about it as well. It's fantastic to speak to people that have such a passion and care for the work they do, that you know, that I think is becoming a rarity. So I'm sure those listening in will go really take heed of what you're working on. But I mean, you know, you talk about projects, big projects and failures, etc. I'm sure Val will chime in about the Sydney Opera House, and you know, everyone thought that was a failure. But you know, we look back in history, and once benefits, as you're alluding to, start being realized, then that's when, you know, the true measure of a project comes into play. But we're not there yet, and we're continuing. And what we can hopefully do, and what we'd like to do, is delve into some of the lessons that can be learned and shared indeed to those listeners out there, to say, you know, yes, it wasn't perfect the way things happened, but here's how we can do things differently. from all aspects, but taking those real life lessons and bring them into other project spaces and just sharing that knowledge, I think would be amazing. And also, we obviously do have Nat on, and from a systems perspective, I'm really interested, being a project controls person as well. You know, what sort of, I guess, elements we could bring in perspective to say, you know, what could we do differently today based on what we're learning from that experience. So it's great that you've set that up. So there have been a few questions posted on LinkedIn by various people, etc. But you mentioned one or two aspects that hit the news: the late release of information, that things were going to be late. If we start there, and as we know, a lot happens before information is released, right? Nat talked about people, process, and tools previously, and all of that comes into it. I wonder if you are able to share why, perhaps from your perspective, that information was late, because we've spoken to various professionals on the show, and everyone talks about communication, stakeholder management, how that is key. Yet it feels like that wasn't particularly done very well. Are there any lessons to be learned from that experience?
Do you want to ask me something else? Are you? No. So ever since I left Crossrail, right, I have batted this question around in my mind over and over and over again. And you know, one of the nice things about being a part of the Crossrail family in the time that I was on the project, I'm still, you know, very close to, you know, a lot of the people that spent so many years on Crossrail, and we talk about it. We talk about it all the time. We replay, you know, what did we know and when? And I think that's been one of the main questions. Certainly, the London Assembly, you know, when they were doing their initial sort of inquiries into you know, the announcement of Crossrail being late, wanted to know who knew what and when. So here's a snippet of God's honest truth for me, right? I sleep perfectly okay at night when I think about Crossrail, because for the almost 4 years that I was on Crossrail, I signed off, you know, every single one of the reports that got given to Crossrail board and subsequently to its stakeholders. And I know everything that, you know, we said in its totality. I know all of the presentations that were given, and I know, you know, how the information was relayed. So it's not as simple as simply saying in August we landed bad news. You know, we were reporting internally growing pressure on Crossrail for a long time, and you know, a program, any major program that does project control successfully, doesn't rely on just one or two data points, relies on a whole series of data points. But it is inherently true that a project is not late until it actually then becomes late. You can be behind schedule, you can have plans to mitigate those delays, you can have recovery plans in place, but you're not late until you reach a point in time where, you know, all of the pieces come together and you can no longer address what is in front of you. And that happened in early 2018. And at that point, we were then into, you know, I won't say crisis management mode, but, you know, now that we know for sure that this thing isn't going to be delivered on time, how do we get this out and get it out as quickly as possible? And at that point, you know, that's when the executive come into their own and they immediately start talking to their stakeholders. And all of those conversations happen a lot earlier than the formal public announcement. So the formal public announcement is kind of like the last thing to sort of hit the airwaves, so to speak. It's got to have gone through all of the internal machinations before it gets made public. But, you know, the truth is, from a project controls perspective, we were well aware of, you know, the increasing pressure on Crossrail for a very long time. We were aware that we, you know, period on period, we're not able to quite hit the output that we were expecting to hit. We were always, 1 or 2 percentage points behind each period on planned works versus actual works delivered, based on the measures that we had. And it's the culmination of all of that that ultimately brings you to a point where you suddenly realize we can't do anything more about this now. So I think for me, given that we knew all of that, I look back and do I think, did we do everything within our power to mitigate those delays, to do everything about it? And again, there was an absolutely united team effort to try to figure out what the best thing to do in order to keep Crossrail on track to deliver on time. The commercial strategy was designed around putting to bed unhelpful commercial disputes that pollute the collaborative effort between the supply chain and the client. We systematically went through that starting in 2016 and addressed all of the issues. It was a strategy essentially designed to remove barriers from the supply chain, so to allow them to essentially reset and move forward on a plan to complete. One thing I'm particularly passionate about communicating to people so that people understand this, every 4 weeks we ran collaborative planning sessions with the contractors staff, as well as Crossrail project management staff, as well as the executive, so it wasn't just happening at low level. Our, master operational handover schedule reviews, were a big affair every 4 weeks, with every single project chiming in, talking about what the current status of their job was and what they needed to do to complete it. But there is reality to all of this. You simply don't know what you don't know. And with the benefit of hindsight, we can now say definitively that we had a better handle on planning around the civil engineering works. We had far less of a grip around the planning, around the final system fit out, testing, commissioning, and what it would take to actually get a brand new railway into trial running. All of that happening at the same time as new software being designed and built by the supply chain. So to say that Crossrail is complex is an understatement. When I look back on everything and I talk about it with former colleagues, I think we're all of the view that the system-wide complexity, it was just never going to be achievable in 10 years. We know that now. We didn't know it at the time, but we know that now. Yeah. And if you go online and you read the National Audit Office report that they did in May 2019, they make some really salient points. Hindsight is an absolutely wonderful science, but they're absolutely right. We did have a fixity on the December 2018 date. It was a date that was so set in stone that everything we did was designed to protect that date. And that drove a desire, a culture, a behaviour to spend the money that was available to us, because we did have contingency money, to accelerate works, to do whatever it was, to increase the amount of parallel working activities, to do everything possible to hold on to that schedule. But unfortunately, you can only hold on to it for so long. And 2018, it snapped.
No, absolutely. And, as you're talking there, I think, all of us are nodding. And certainly Val and I have worked on projects where, what you're saying resonates. And I thank you, first of all, for your candidness up front. But I guess just to add on behalf of all project people, not just project controls, that no one enjoys delivering bad news. No one actually works on a project to fail. That is, if people are doing that, then they shouldn't be working on projects, right? But I've yet to come across someone that works on a project to miss a date or to overspend.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
People forget that. And you talk about culture and you talk about some of the signs that you saw, and I'll hand over to Val because I'm sure he'll go into that in a bit. But I just want to add there that, you know, I can see, you know, you are passionate about this, and you're giving your honest, candid view, and I'm just going, yeah, that I've seen that before, and it's really difficult. It's a tough space to be. But Val, please jump in.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the view as well. I think big shout out to anyone on mega projects. I really feel like we're not measuring mega projects the right way. We seem to think there's one measure for all, and we use the iron triangle as our point of success rate. So we say, you know, cost, time, and quality. That's how we're going to measure every single project, and that's it. But we all know, and Dale and I know, especially with the rail signaling piece, when you introduce, you know, you said trains, it's interfacing with 3 different signaling systems. You're introducing software, you're introducing a timetable because you've got operating systems and operating train networks that cannot shut down. This is London, the city that never sleeps. So there's a lot of complexities, and I think it does fall into that complicated basket rather than just complex. I think with systems and tools, which we'll get to, Nat, I'm sure, is we can start to handle volume now. There's machine systems, there's tools out there now that volume isn't really going to be an issue in the near future or even now, but complications, that's a human element that needs to be managed and controlled. And the challenge is obviously the commercial and political pressures of putting a deadline in place that wasn't set by the project team, that against all odds is always ambitious. And once that's set publicly, you work backwards from that date, and you are tied to it regardless of the evidence. And we've seen that in other projects. And as it compiles and the date gets closer, you get a better estimate of the forecast, and you say, well, actually, you know, there's a probability that we might not hit that date. And that probability changes. You know, you put in mitigations, you do treatments, you change your resource plans. And like you said, the teams do everything they can. They pull out all stops to try and get these things done. So I think I commend anyone on the Crossrail project. Australia's had some similar projects in terms of size and complexity, and probably the media smear as well, where we had the National Broadband Network, which is to roll out optic fiber across the whole country. And everyone knows how big Australia is. If you don't, Google it. And that was a very big challenge. But lo and behold, like you said, hindsight's a great gift, isn't it? That when COVID happened, thank goodness we had optic fiber, because everyone was working from home, and Australians were still able to work and keep the economy going and feed their families. And so, you know, I think Crossrail is very much the same. Like you said, Rich, you know, maybe people are still a bit bitter about it and it's got some bad taste in the media, but in the long term, I think it's a really good investment, and obviously it's going to benefit the people in the UK. So I think one of the challenges is, how do we not measure mega projects by cost, time, and quality? Is there a better metric to measure mega projects from your perspective?
I don't have the answer to that, is the honest truth. As you sort of said in the intro, Dale, I'm currently working on Transpennine, right? So Transpennine is at the other end of the scale. Transpennine is still going through its outline business case. And what I am seeing, and I'm not here to talk about Transpennine, but what I am experiencing is the same as what the Crossrail people experienced. It's the same as what Heathrow Third Runway people experienced. It's the same as what Hinkley people experienced, which is to get a mega program off the ground in the first place, there is huge pressure to drive down cost, to compress schedule, to be able to commit to key benefits within certain parliamentary cycles. There is big drivers to doing that. And
yeah.
One of the questions that I'm immediately faced with straight away is, you know, if we had known that Crossrail was going to be 13, maybe 14 years on day one, and if we had known that it was going to be at least another, you know, £4-5 billion on top, would it have been delayed another 2 years whilst, you know, those numbers were argued in Parliament? I don't know. But, you know, what I do know is that political balance between, you know, getting an infrastructure project off the ground versus, you know, how an infrastructure project ultimately turns out is not easy. Your question around, you know, is there a better metric? I read that NAO report again before coming on this podcast to talk to you guys. It's been quite a while since I read it, but it did say one thing that sort of resonated with me, got me thinking. This fixity around an end date. I look back and I think, would we have been better on Crossrail to simply say, right, look, Crossrail is essentially a civil engineering job, followed by a system fit out, followed by testing and commissioning of brand new railway systems that are very complex, followed by trial running.
Yeah.
With all of the skills that we've got, we can put an accurate estimate together for the civil engineering piece, and let's lock in a date for when that'll get done. But from there on in, we're going to have to build an estimate based on what we know further down the track. So, could we get into a situation where mega programs don't actually have a fixed end date at the point in which they're approved? They have staged end dates. That to me is something that is very worthy of discussion.
Yeah, I agree.
I also know. Yeah, I also know that somehow we have to kind of try to divorce the relationship between political will for a project to happen or not happen versus the engineering requirement behind a scheme for society. And, we're kind of moving to that in the UK with the National Infrastructure Council. I'm not particularly close to the Infrastructure Council, but, my understanding was always that the aspiration behind that was, to basically get engineers to have a bigger role to play in decisions around national infrastructure, as opposed to it being a decision made by someone in Treasury who simply looks at a scheme and can no longer justify, spending X billion pounds on something in the northeast or in the southwest because they don't feel that the political support is there for the scheme. So, there is, to me, that is something else that we need to seriously talk about in this country a bit more.
Well, I think you're being on. I think we need qualified people who are qualified in that field, providing and shaping policy and providing education, really. It's a bit like media as well. We have, newsrooms talking about projects which they don't understand. So naturally they smear them with, let's be honest, most newsrooms are not optimistic. They'll take the pessimistic route because that gets the clicks. But ultimately we probably need a project newsroom read by project people and providing updates on what's really happening, and use that as our own press release or public release for these mega projects. I think, there is an experiment going on. I'm going to get Nat in because she's been patiently waiting there in a second. There is an experiment down in Australia and Victoria where they're doing just that with a CBTC signaling program called Metro Tunnel. It's around the $14 billion mark, where they have done exactly what you just said, Rich, where they've split the packages. So they've got a civils and tunnels package, they've got an infrastructure package, and they've got a systems integration package, which is, I'll see how that goes. It's still in kind of hitting delivery phase now. So we'll let you know how that methodology goes. They're all separate PPPs. So obviously contracts play a role in that. The jury's out whether that's more successful, but it'd be great to compare. I think this is, this platform and talking to people like yourself, Rich, and Nat, is we can have this dialogue, and then we can check back in a year and say, hey, hindsight again, was this successful? Could we apply this in the UK? Can UK apply what they're doing over there with the National Infrastructure Council? I think Australia should look at that as well. But Nat, I want to get you back in because you've been sitting there very patiently listening attentively. And, the same point around the metrics, and I don't know if you know the answer to this or you've got some ideas, but you've certainly been around software and performance software on projects. And so, can you weigh in on, is there better metrics? Is there a better way to kind of alert teams on forecast accuracy and whether or not we've got better options now?
Yeah, so I was thinking about the pod that we did before when we were talking about, the future of project controls and everybody just being an analyst and looking at the data. And when I first started with Deltek and I was kind of learning about kind of earn value and all of those good things, I remember reading one of our, I think they're called clarity reports. And their reports that Deltek does, they put them out to our clients. We get loads of feedback, and then it's just kind of how project controls is changing. And I always remember on the earned value, specifically as it relates to aerospace and defence, is that earned value was there because you don't always know what you're actually building. So if you're building an aircraft carrier or some kind of craft that's going into space, on the day that you decide to do that, if there's a 10-year difference between the start date and the end date, a lot is going to change technology-wise, design-wise, politically-wise, depending on who's kind of driving said country at the time. And so earned value was something that was, okay, so we're not 100% sure what we're going to build. So we're not 100% sure what date that's going to finish, because there's a lot of change happening. But what we do know is we know what quality looks like, and quality can then be aligned against your performance. So you could say, thinking about what Richard was talking about and what you were talking about, Val, when you say let's take cost, time and quality, if we put more focus onto, do we have a good plan? Are we delivering what we say we want to say? Because Richard, I think you said a couple of times we would do our planning reviews and we'd always be a couple of percentage points out. But if you were always focusing on doing the best, delivering the best, ensuring that the scope that you've got is going to take one man one day to dig a hole, you know, typical boring earned value. If you focused on that, does that give you, especially from the media's perspective, because you're not wasting money, you're making sure that the work that you're doing is driving an end project, you're getting value for money, you are moving forward, everybody is kind of included. Does that help take some of the pressure off and allow the project to change direction? Because even with Crossrail, you know, we've been building railways in the UK and the globe for a very long time. But even with like HS2 now, the amount of change, either to the project, to the political environment, to the amount of oak trees that have to come down in order for things to go through, and that kind of, how are we going to do that? We need to now move bats, and we need to move this, and we need to move that. All of that is things that we're dealing with today that maybe we didn't deal with 30 years ago. And we will be dealing with different things in another 10 years, but we don't give ourselves enough time to be able to react to that change, because as Richard said, everybody's looking at that end date and remaining in that end date. And I don't know, I wonder whether or not, and it may be earned value and putting the focus on what have we done, what have we delivered, and would the media be happier with that? Because you can then say, do you know what, I said it was going to cost this and it has cost this and we're moving forward, and everybody can see that progress, because that's what earned value is. It's about understanding and quantifying progress as you move forward. I don't know.
Yeah, no, they're good comments. It's speculative. No one has a silver bullet for measuring projects to success, but we want to try and improve as we go. And the challenge is if you look at the stats in terms of successful projects, the way we measure them, we're not getting better at it, but projects are certainly getting bigger and more complicated. Rich, back to your point. And so how do we then take the moving parts? And I like the idea, project controls 101 is just decompose it, try and package it up to something that's quantifiable, something that's measurable, something that's realistic. And back to your point, Nat, something that we can measure, but the end date is obviously something. So I think my interpretation of that is time. Time is something that we need flexibility on. Quality is something we should emphasize. And I think that's a really good point from both of you, that we do need to figure out a way to redefine controls, because again, we're in project controls, right? So the element, the clue is in the title, and yet when it comes out into the media, suddenly then it's polarized, and you're not just dealing with the pressures of tasks and delivering the deliverables, you're dealing with the commercial sensitivities, your contractors, kind of the face of the organization, because these projects are projectified, they're their own organizations. And so there's no easy conversation about that. And I'm treading light waters here before I say something about Crossrail that you probably can't comment on. So I'm going to hand over to Dale for the next comment.
Thanks, Val. It's fascinating listening in, because, so first on your comment, Nat, EV is not boring. I love EV. Steve Wake will probably also really give you a thumbs up for promoting EV. So well done for that. But I find with EV that people rubbish it before they fully understand and appreciate what it can do. So that's probably one stumbling block.
Agree.
What is it, Dale? Well, let's explain it. What is earned value for, I mean, can someone give us an easy, what's their explanation? The easiest. Anyone? Dale, you want to go first?
I'm happy to go first. For me, it's doing what project managers should be doing, measuring project performance in a set methodology. But the key thing is that I find, and a problem with any methodology, not just earned value, is that often the basis of estimates going in to set that baseline are often not mature enough. And so people try and set an earned value management baseline for a multi-year, multi-billion, complex, complicated program at a detailed level, and they wonder why they fail, rather than trying to do it, as Rich was trying to allude to, if you had stages and say, right, we know what we know in the next 6 to 12 months. Let's detail plan that and measure that. And when we get to the future work, we'll detail plan that. And let's measure it in the right way. And as an earned value advocate, I will say earned value is not for every single project, but you can adapt it and adopt it and use it effectively if everyone understands it. Now, the key challenge I always find is I spend most of my time when I come onto a project using earned value, educating people on what it can give them and how they can use it to make right decisions. And if we did that education piece, and I think you alluded to it, Val, the knowledge piece up front, and prepared everyone for execution, it's almost like, you know, if we use sports analogies, train for match day, right? If you did all that training before match day, you'd be prepared to execute. But we don't do that. We go to bid, contracts awarded, right, boom, let's go. Okay, now we have to set up earned value. Now we have to set up this. Now we have to construct a schedule. Why didn't we do that before we started delivering? So there's a whole big piece, and we've gone down a bit of a rabbit hole there. But I'll come back around to it as well. And Rich, I think you want to comment on earned value.
Okay, so for those people that know me, I'm like you, Dale. I'm quite passionate about earned value. And as far as I'm concerned, earned value and what it can offer isn't in dispute. You know, I mean, the maths of earned value and the techniques is fine. The only way in which earned value ever goes wrong is when human beings get involved in it, and just manage to make things a little bit more complicated, stage by stage. You know, as you shoehorn more and more into it, and you start measuring more and more complicated things, all of a sudden, earned value takes on a level of complexity, and you find yourself, you know, picking holes in, how accurate is my physical percent complete this period, or how accurate is my baseline. The earning techniques, and I've literally just written a document now for the team that I'm working with at the moment on the earning techniques that are available in a system that has a name a bit like a snake. And it essentially, you know, is an art form, right? It's so
that's a movie reference. Sorry.
It requires people to understand much more about counting widgets and how you do that, and than just totting up the numbers. But that isn't the end of the story for earned value for me. You know, the big thing about earned value is the so what factor, right? And getting people to understand what having an estimate at completion low versus an estimate at completion high range really means, and trying to convince them that, you know, when this voodoo piece of software / calculation is telling them that they're going to be 20% over budget and they're going to be late by 4 months, it's like, you know, trying to convince people of that is often the hardest sell. And, you know, I'll just call a spade because, you know, anybody can, make a freedom of information request on information from Crossrail. And if Crossrail is good enough to give it to you, you'll see it. But, you know, month in, month out on Crossrail for all of the 4 years I was there, we reported, forecast information. We reported, first of all, the P50. We then reported the P80. We then reported the P90. We then reported the estimate at completion low. We reported the estimate at completion high. So that's 5 different data points every 4 weeks on the forecast outturn cost for the program. We didn't just report one. You know, we reported 5 different numbers each period, and we showed the trends of each of those numbers and whether or not some were going up and some were horizontal, and you know, some were up and down, up and down, up and down. And so, you know, and on top of all of that, we also, I remember one chap I was working with, he went around and basically did a straw poll of all of the key players on Crossrail, senior project managers and executives, and just said to them, tell me how much gut feel Crossrail is going to cost. And so, you know, everyone writes down a number, and it's the wisdom of crowds, right? It's the same theory as Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? Ask the audience, right? It's the wisdom of crowds. It's the phenomenon. And you know, the wisdom of the crowds coalesces on a number. And guess what? You know, the wisdom of the crowds had a number that was higher than the P50 number that we were reporting on Crossrail. So, you know, we never did just report one thing. We reported a whole range of things, but trying to convince people that, you know, the P80, the P95, the EAC low, the EAC high, and the wisdom of crowds was all more realistic than the P50, which is what Crossrail had to ultimately report on. That's what we were required to report against, the P50 number. You know, that can be a hard sell. And it wasn't until later in the program that, you know, everyone started to hone in on the fact that the P50 was definitely no longer realistic. We knew that, you know.
Well, it's flip of the coin, right? P50, flip of the coin.
Well, yeah, exactly. I think we did an internal audit in 2017 that basically told us, you know, we're going to be much closer to the P80 number, but that was what we knew back then. So
yeah, exactly. No, it's fascinating. And just to comment on that before I come back to Nat, it's strange. We do have all of this various analytics available to us, and you know, computers can do it, tools can do it. Nat will tell us, and do it very quickly. But there is also a fact of GIGO, as Paul Googe calls it, you know, garbage in, garbage out. So we have to account for that. But also I find that your stakeholders, your senior stakeholders, they are looking for one number. And yet you go, well, it's a project. I can't give you one number. But that comes back to culture again. And I want to bring Nat in to comment on culture before I come back to you, Rich, because for me, Nat, you work with a lot of clients, and you know the tool sets and the systems like the back of your hand. You can recommend amazing systems and amazing tools and bring them in. But I'm sure you've seen quite a lot of cultural setups, and that plays quite a big part in how those tools are utilized and how the information coming out of them is accepted, used to make informed decisions. And so I wonder, coming back maybe a little bit to Val's question around KPIs, is there a way to measure culture? That's probably a huge psychological rabbit hole we'll go down. But just, I guess, from your experience working with different clients, have you come across particular types of cultures that are, I guess, better geared up to use the metrics around them? And if you have, what are some of those signs that those listening can go, okay, that's wrong and this is right, and I can see it now?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because our clients, or my clients, kind of really kind of cover the spectrum. So, you know, small projects will use our tools, large projects will use our tools. You know, aerospace and defense, rail, and they're all driven by kind of different requirements. So if we have like an aerospace and defense, it's there's that moment that for the project teams, it's so black and white what they need to do. It kind of takes out some of the gray area, because and that's exactly it, isn't it? Because there is a right way that they want that project to be delivered, they being kind of, you know, all the mandates that come down from specific aerospace and defense. And so everybody is on the same page, because the page is written out for them, and it's quite clear what they will be required to do. And because the powers that be, who are then reviewing that one number or the multiple numbers, even if you're right at the very bottom, so you're a planner all the way right up to kind of heads of project controls or MDs of clients that are delivering on behalf of another client, etc. It's so consistent all the way through that everybody knows what they need to do. And sometimes that's really helpful, but it doesn't really kind of open the door for people to use initiative or to try things in a different way, because it has been kind of really scripted. So it's almost that piece that if you've followed the ingredients, you've followed the recipe, you've cooked it in an oven, and everything has been followed, you should get a perfect cake out the other end. And if the cake doesn't come out perfect at the other end, it isn't anybody's problem, because we did it all together and everybody knew what they were doing. So there was no, it's very difficult to do a finger blame, but it's also very difficult for somebody to kind of put their head above the parapet, because you, again, that kind of, let's try something a bit different. So it can get really kind of segmented and it can get really stringent, but those types of implementations are really quick because everybody knows what they need to have ready to be successful, and they know that at every single level within their organization what that success looks like. And then you can go for other clients that are trying to do things on best practice. So we want to deliver our projects. And it's interesting because sometimes you'll listen and you're implementing something and people are still discussing kind of fundamental planning processes and how am I going to attach my CVS to my OVS to my WVS. And it's fine. It's just at some point you do have to stop, get something down on paper, get something implemented, test it and move on. So, you know, that kind of more agile waterfall effect. But the piece that's the same is consistency and everybody realizing what success looks like. What does that cake look like when it comes out of the oven? And how do we get to that point quickly without procrastinating? And does that go against what you said though, Dale? So, you know, when it's like, oh, we just want to get into the project and now we're going to set up our processes. Sometimes you kind of just need to get something down and just see how successful you can be, and then adapt to change as you're going, because change is inevitable. And I think that's the piece here that probably needs more addressing, is that projects change and the speed in which you respond to that change is a key piece. Because if your project is 10% out, 20% out, and you don't capture that quick enough, then your end date is out, regardless of how much you throw at it. It's really difficult to get some of your projects back. So I don't know if I'm kind of waffling there.
No,
but
it's fantastic.
Consistency is, and getting everybody to understand. If I say kind of estimate at complete versus estimate to complete versus remaining budget, you know, and getting those real fundamentals that everybody knows what that means, how to use it, because that's the other thing that you were talking about, Dale, when we talked about earned value and getting to one number. But everybody always wants different reports. Everybody wants, well, maybe we should have this piece of data, maybe we should have this piece of data. And so this bottom layer, everybody wants everything. And then by the time you get to the top, they want kind of just that one number. So there's a lot of stuff that's lost in the middle. But if you don't do anything with your own value, and I've heard this a lot, not in the last kind of 5 years, but definitely a lot earlier. Oh, we're spending so much time getting to this earned value number and we don't have time to respond to it. And why are we spending all of this time doing it? It's the difference between earned value and earned value management. And if you're not managing your project, then there is no point doing earned value. So you might as well just go for the 70%. I've done this, I think I'm about right. Because as you say, or as Richard said, what do you got, the when you went and did the straw man, you had to term for it, and I can't remember what it is now. But that does actually work. You know, the vast majority of people, and ask the audience what they think there's going to happen. You know, people's experience and gut feel does come into play as well. But, you know, if you want to have everybody on the same page, they have to have something in black and white. They have to know what success is. It does come down to cultural adoption and stakeholder engagement. And perhaps we need to be a little bit more open to and flexible to the cake might look different. Yeah. And if it does, is that a problem? As long as we can eat it, it doesn't matter.
I love that you bring up cake because, you know, Val's birthday we mentioned.
Oh, yeah.
So thanks again, Val. Yeah, thanks again, Val, for the cake. But no, I'm glad you challenged, you know, the whole balance of how prepared you need to go into delivery versus how much you should learn on the project. Because we had on our last pod, we spoke about change management and what the influences are as well. So we had a big sort of discussion around that, and there's so many different elements to culture. But if I jump to Rich quickly, just one of the questions that came in from one of our listeners via LinkedIn was pointed around culture. Has the culture changed on Crossrail? And that, you would assume, means that the culture was bad. But I don't necessarily think that it's bad because a project goes wrong. I wonder if you could comment on that, Rich.
I can comment, but I can't comment in totality. So what I can tell you is that I did many presentations on the culture, the evolution of the culture on Crossrail, because when Crossrail first came together, you had Crossrail Limited, and they then employed Bechtel and Transcend as their delivery partners and program partners. And for the first few years, it did not work. The parties did not function particularly well as a team. And the NAO audit report does pick up on this point. I can't remember the year, someone will have to correct me, 2011, 2010, I can't remember when it was, 2012 maybe. The decision was made that we had a lot of great people on the program, and so we'll just put them, best fit for the role, and forget the contracting boundary lines, and Crossrail, Transcend, and Bechtel basically came together and became one organisation, Crossrail. And from that point on, the culture really started to improve. Crossrail got a new branding, a new identity. Its purpose was much more clearly understood. They had the strapline, moving London forward, 3 simple words that people could remember. And they really, coalesced on one coherent purpose for the organisation. And that's a powerful thing. I joined the program in 2015, and as I said at the beginning of this podcast, it was the best, 3.5, almost 4 years that I've had in my program career to date, and that was because the culture that I was working in, from top to bottom, was an extremely supportive culture. You're sitting in executive meetings. There's a lot of people in the room. And to have, the program director say, I want to hear what this person's got to say. No, let that person speak. It's a positive reinforcement environment. But you asked me, has the culture changed on Crossrail? Well, I left at the end of 2018, and so I can't comment on the post Crossrail culture. But I think it's fair to say that the last 3 years have probably been the hardest 3 years on Crossrail, and I'll be extremely surprised if the culture hasn't undergone a significant transformation.
No, that's fair, and I know you're trying to be as candid as you can, so I appreciate that as well. But like I say, we got these questions in, and it just sort of alludes to certain aspects, and I do wonder sometimes people's views on sometimes people jump to conclusions on what the root cause for what is seen as failure is. And yes, sometimes it's culture, sometimes it's perhaps control systems, or sometimes it's the application thereof, or it could be a host of things. But I don't think... I mean,
the one thing I do know, Dale, is, for the time that I was there, I was surrounded by some of the most capable people I've worked with, both in the supply chain and in the management team, in the client organization. Some extremely capable people. And, as I said earlier, I'll defend Crossrail and the program and where it's at to anyone that wants to throw rocks at it. If that crowd of people that I was working with couldn't deliver the program successfully, I think you'd be extremely lucky to go out and find another organisation, another team that could have done it and got Crossrail completed in December 2018. That's one of those we'll never know.
Yeah,
but that's what I firmly believe.
No, well put, and thank you for adding that bit. Val, please jump in.
Yeah, Rich, I'm not going to throw rocks, but I might throw some paper planes if that's all right. Just going back on a few points you mentioned, not phone a friend, but asking the masses of their input for planning. So yeah. I'd like for people who probably don't know that method, planning poker. It's a very good method of getting people to just give their gut feel of what's happening. It's a really good way of dealing with things. Back to earned value, Nat, you mentioned as well. What two pet peeves? I mean, I'm an advocate for earned value as well when it's applied properly. And I think we alluded to the fact that if you're not going to change behavior when you see the indications, then it's not really going to work for you or your project. But two things that bother me and probably every day on a project is the basis of estimate and the rules of credit around how you actually collect progress. I think, as lagging indicators, those have to be pretty accurate or at least have some methodology and logic behind them so that you can understand and appreciate how close you are. And then there's those forward indicators where you're going to the project manager and you're saying, give me your estimate to complete. And you're comparing that to some statistical analysis, which is generally based on lagging indicators. So it all comes down to garbage in, garbage out, like Paul Goodge, our friend, says, GIGO. And I just wanted to mention that. But the volume of change as well on mega projects makes earned value very difficult because you're always trying to update the PMB. So if we're constantly changing things, it makes it a very difficult system to, even if you're using good software, there's still a manual point of entry. There's still processes and approvals. It does get very, very complicated and very difficult because then you're running multiple baselines, multiple reports. So that you mentioned 4, but you're probably doing that for baseline 1, 2, and 3. There's probably an escalated version, a de-escalated version. There's probably one in the middle somewhere. There's one with BCRs implemented. There's one without. You end up getting very complex. And I can see it from an executive's point of view. It's like, it's too much. And I think there's still a bit of evolution to go in software to simplify that experience for executives. They're getting hammered at every single level. And I think I'll just go to the final points. You're talking about culture and how this integrates into that is, from my simple view and my observation actually on mega projects is, and particularly rail, because it's such a beast, is leadership. Is, like you mentioned, obviously the culture in Crossrail it was probably a good one because of the leadership to allow people to speak, to have an open forum, to get people's opinions, but also I think leadership's role of managing the climate. And that's usually the top-down climate rather than the bottom-up climate. So protecting your teams from the craziness that happens at the very high levels of these hierarchies and the political pressures that they're under. There's something to be said around those leaders who maintain that pressure and internalize it rather than distributing it to their teams. And it's very easy to vent and complain and, my boss is a dick and he's doing this and, why are they doing that when they should be doing this? And especially when we're passionate about certain methodologies, I think certainly we can get on the negative bandwagon. But I think a real leader in these mega projects should be maintaining that buffer between the pressures of their bosses and how their teams perform. And is that something you saw on Crossrail? I just wanted to check that's how you saw it.
100%, Val. And I don't mind calling him out. Simon Wright was the program director when I joined the program, and in the last 6 months that for my time on the program, he was also the chief executive. One of the most supportive program directors I've ever worked in. Protected the organization, protected the people below, created that buffer between the stakeholder politics with TfL, RFL, and sponsors, and between that and the organisation. I never witnessed bad behaviours from either Simon or the rest of the executive team. I heard some stories about some arguments in the boardroom from time to time, but God, you've got to expect that. But ultimately, there's a reason why I said it's one of the best programs I've ever worked on, because those behaviours were the kind of behaviours that any one of us would be privileged to get to experience and work in. I mean, the thing is about behaviours, right? You know it when you see it. And, you know, I can't necessarily describe it to you, but I knew that the behaviours from day one of me joining Crossrail, from the senior leadership team, were the kind of behaviours that every major programme would be proud to have.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And I guess the next question is probably around data, and we'll get Nat in this as well, and comment where you can, and where you can't, you can just tell me to shove off. But what exactly is Crossrail's approach to dealing with all that data? You've got a lot of information, obviously. It's cascaded down, then it's bottom up, I guess, and you're compiling that into reports. Is there some takeaways, at least positive ones, that you could, or even negative ones that you could talk about?
So actually, right, because Crossrail is such a long program, you know, in its 12th year and counting now, we talked earlier about the development of systems during the life of the project itself. And I sometimes have to pinch myself that Crossrail, you know, predated BIM. You remember when UK government said, you know, all projects have to be BIM level 2 by 2016? Right. Yeah, well, Crossrail was like, you know, up and running, you know, 6-7 years before that deadline was in place. And so our systems were actually fairly straightforward. You know, we had planning, we had cost management, we had our change management system, we had our risk management system, and they were all linked into a common data warehouse. And one thing I'm really proud of, and one of the lessons that, you know, I like to evangelize to anyone who'll listen, is, you know, we got to a point where with absolute fluency on Crossrail, that 4-weekly drumbeat where the project teams update their information at their end, it comes into the systems get locked down. We in the centre did our assurance and review and checks, made sure that everything, you know, added up. No one had slapped on an extra couple of noughts anywhere. You know, dealt with all of that. And then we published from the centre a consistent data set back out to all the projects. So we did not have project teams creating their own little dashboards. We basically published data-rich dashboards back to the projects, and the projects put their commentary on it. That gave us absolute consistency in the way in which data was presented. But look at today's world, right? You know, we had ClickView as the business intelligence application. Never used it once. I never used it once. We did not have any business intelligence software. Power BI is all the rage today. You know, everybody wants you know, a good business intelligence platform, and you know, it's absolutely great. And program I'm working on right now, we're implementing Power BI, but we never had any of that on Crossrail. What we did was we took a consistent data set from the data warehouse, and once we had that data set, we generated our visuals, our performance management information, using Excel. I had one extremely smart person working for me who ran my performance analysis unit. There wasn't anything that she couldn't do with Excel. Yeah, we generated some really comprehensive analytics consistently across the program. And so yeah, that is how we managed the data. I hope that answers your question, Val. I kind of have lost sight of what you asked me. Sorry.
No, that's okay. I was just wondering how you dealt with the volume, and you know, it does sound like from your perspective, Richard. Maybe because you're an optimistic guy, maybe, I don't know. But you had you know, pre-BIM, and I think we should all recognise the fact that, you know, we're going to have on these big projects, we're going to have new technology introduced, and that's a new complexity to project controls. Is how do you get new technology in and remove obsolescent kind of technology, and that presents a problem itself. I don't know if you've ever tried to introduce a new tool to an audience. It's a very difficult thing to do, and maybe I'll get Nat to comment on that in a second. But the other thing,
we're doing it right now, aren't we, Nat?
Yeah. Well, the other thing is, like, it sounds like you had everything in place. So we had, you had your systems and tools linked. You had a 4-week drumbeat. You had a single source of truth. You had consistent reporting. Yet, the media paints this as, and this could be misconstrued, but as a failure, as late, as over budget, as misdirected.
They paint the project as failed because it's late and it's spending more money, right? But as far as I'm aware, no one's ever said project controls was a failure. No one's ever said change control was a failure. No one's ever said Crossrail produced low quality reports. There's a reason why we were so passionate about putting everything onto the Learning Legacy website, and that was because every single one of the authors was really proud of the quality of the material that they produced. I actually put it front and center on the Controls Learning Legacy. One of the key lessons learned: produce the best quality information you possibly can, because good quality information, well presented, is a confidence builder.
Exactly, and it creates...
You present right information, but in a really naff way. You don't inspire confidence. You invite people to question things, or worse still, people just ignore what you're producing because it doesn't look very good.
Yeah.
But you produce it in a high quality way, in a readable way, and that's why project controls is an art form, because it's not just about being able to produce the graph at the end of the day. It's about being able to translate it into information that people are willing to engage with. You'll never win everyone. You'll never get everyone to engage. But those that can do it well get an audience. I remember going to a lecture where a guy was talking about attention being a commodity that you have to try and grab. And that's what a good project controls person does. They grab the attention of the people around them and get them to listen. And
100%.
I'm not saying we were
100%.
always successful at that, but that's what we aspired to do.
Nat, do you want to jump in there?
No, I was just going to agree, because if you've got flaky reports, the first thing that people come back with is the data is wrong. And if the conversation in the meeting is about justifying the data, then the conversation is not about changing the project to get back on track. And as Richard says, if people, when you're in a meeting and the attention is based on this is the situation, what are we doing next? That's when a project changes and moves forward. If the conversation is about, well, history is wrong, and that's where we're going to focus, then you're not going to change anything if all you're doing is trying to justify history rather than kind of, respond to what's going to happen in the future. And that kind of, that consistency, the audit process, the belief that what you're looking at is the truth, and getting there much quicker so that nothing's ever up for debate on that is always a good start.
Yeah,
I'm going through that kind of exercise right now. I'm working with a chap at the moment who I've got in. I think you guys know him well, Dave. Every project needs a Dave, I can tell you that straight away. And we're going through a data fix right now. We're looking to address some of our underlying issues in the systems that we've got. It's not the issue with the system; it's the issue with Geiger, as you said earlier, and we've just got to systematically go through and fix that and give ourselves a solid platform to work from.
And there's a culture thing as well there. Just because the data is wrong doesn't mean it's anybody's fault. I think we really need to move away from this blame culture that we have, that instead of people holding on to it for dear life because my way is correct, and just kind of being open to the fact that there are different ways of doing it, or perhaps the project needs you to do something in a different way, and kind of adopting change, and kind of, instead of like cloistering your way in a corner, I'm going to make my own dashboard, I'm going to do it my way. And then, and kind of being more receptive to kind of sharing and changing, and a bit more of a kumbaya moment maybe. That's not a bad thing.
Another good comment from Nat. I think I agree, and I even go one step further, is the victim culture as well. I think there's two. There's the blame culture. Then there's, I can't possibly change it. It's all happening to me. Why isn't my boss or that team fixing it for me? Why aren't the engineers supporting us? I think it's up to everybody to take that internal leader position and make the change they want to see, especially on big projects. It takes a big team and it takes everyone to be involved. And I think a lot of the time they'll pick out particular people and we would just point the finger, but then also everyone blames the systems. You know, well, the systems don't talk to each other, but there's always a way around, and nothing's 100%, as you said, Rich, which is a fantastic point. But Nat, I think as well, we talked about obsolescent technology and the future in previous pods. So check out Nat's previous pods. We did talk about the future, but also the application of this on projects that span, you know, longer than a decade. You know, Rich is talking about pre-BIM. You know, now BIM's exciting and it's that visual management piece and it's great for engineering design. But would you ever go back and the risk associated with applying that backwards to a project that's already past design, for example, like what benefits do they have and how do they do that? How do they implement new software into a big project like Crossrail?
Gosh, I mean,
take your time.
Yeah. I mean, you often get customers that will come in that will say, you know, we need to put in a piece of software because we've got a new project, and they'll start it on a new project, and then some of the historical ones will say, oh, I quite like that. I might like to have a crack at putting that on some historical stuff. But I'm going to say the vast majority will be new projects based on the lessons learned from projects that are running at the moment, because there is for what it is that I do and what we sell, it is all about the future, and putting too much emphasis on the historical past is hard. So, you know, focusing on how data should come together and why data should come together, because the amount of conversations that we have about, well, you could do that, but why would you want to? Why do you want to overcomplicate something? Because there's a truckload of information there, and sometimes you do need to see the wood for the trees, and doing it slowly. So that's the other piece. You know, moving away from that big bang moment, again, supporting culture, making small changes that build confidence in people that what they're seeing is correct, that managing to whichever number you've provided does see improvement in the future, and seeing those small baby steps. That's how you get people to change. And what we also see is the culture of people that have worked on mega projects, taking that to the next project that they've got. So, you know, there's going to be large projects out there, Crossrail having to put kind of BIM stuff on. What's the value that it's going to kind of bring? Because potentially it could just also derail something because everything stops while we just recalibrate, but time is still ticking, costs are still kind of spiraling, and so on and so forth. So I don't know, different companies will do it in different ways, and a lot of it will come down from the ultimate client. If the ultimate client says to you, thou must do this, sometimes you have no choice but to do that. That was thou, not Val.
No, I hear you.
Yeah,
I got one more.
I'll give you my 2 cents on that, right? It very much depends on, you know, the client's understanding of what it is they're actually asking for, right? Because some clients know that putting in a system mid-flight is going to cause problems, but they're enlightened about it and are prepared to experience the pain for the long-term gain. Unfortunately, there are plenty of clients who, you know, say they want a system and then turn around and say, right, you've got 3 months and that's it, and it'll all be perfect. That's kind of what I said to Natalie when I first started working with her a year ago. You know, I don't think I even gave you 3 months. I think I gave you 8 weeks. But yeah,
magic one time.
Great motivator.
Exactly.
Motivation stick. Perfect.
I mean, so one of the things that I certainly wanted to come out on this podcast, and one of the reasons why I wanted to accept Nat's sort of encouragement to come and talk about this stuff, is because to me, the combination of software vendors working alongside their user community is how you get the best developments in whatever platform it is that you're looking at. I don't care whether it's a cost management system or a risk system or a planning system. All too often we see developments in software happening because the software teams are basically just working through their own bug fix list of things that they've had on their to-do list for a long period of time, whereas in fact the user community is crying out for certain functionality. And I think that's one of the things that I've really wanted to promote. I learned it on Crossrail, and I'm carrying that ethos into my current working relationships, getting closer to the people who supply us with the tools that we use on a daily basis, so that I can try to directly influence how those tools are developed in the near future, not in 10 years' time, but Natalie will attest. We had a conversation about the fact that, and we've talked on this podcast about earned value. Earned schedule is a more communicative way of describing how late you are on the program. Earned value tells you that you're, £500,000 late.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that doesn't really mean very much to some project managers. They would much rather you told them that they're 6 months late, because at least then you're communicating in the right units. And so, we've had conversations about how do we make this accessible through the platforms that you're wanting to use. And so I think, that's incumbent upon all people who are fortunate enough, and I've been one of them, who have large budgets available to them on projects with a lot of influence and a lot of time in front of them, where we can sit down and get some fundamental inputs into how software is developed. And that interplay, I think, is a critical relationship for the industry going forward.
Yeah, I might have some. Let's talk future then around software and project controls. Future being like, I don't know how far away this is, but do you think proprietary software has a time limit? When I say that, I'm talking about some observations. I spent a lot of time thinking about data, probably more than most, probably as much as you, Nat. And one of the things I've noticed, particularly with data scientists and data engineers, is that once you train a machine, you can actually convince yourself that one system could literally do everything. So let's presume that the only limitation to software is inputs, right? We said quality in, quality out, parameters, estimates, schedule information, rules of credit for progress, contract structuring, delivery partners. Through machine learning and some of the, I don't profess to be an expert in data science, but I do shout out to all my guys that are in that space who are working in project controls now, starting to get in there. Where do you see proprietary software? Because not all of them play nice. But where do you see the limit, or are they all going to flip over to providing a one size fits all? And I'll probably go with Nat first, and then I'll ask Richard to comment next.
So I think it would be a very sad world if it was one size fits all, because I think just the sheer fact that there's so much kind of diversity in different types of projects, and what people, what that cake looks like at the end, there's lots of different kind of looks and feels. And I think, with what Richard was just saying about kind of working with your vendor to ensure that things are developed in a way that kind of works for your project. If it was a one shop, one stop, one product, then it's kind of one way. And I don't necessarily think, that competitions piece that, we're a software vendor and there are other tools out there, and we all probably do a lot that's very, very similar. And then there are elements of our software that is not similar. And, when choosing your software provider, you're choosing more than just the capability of the tool set. And it's those nuances, I think, that gives people options to try things kind of differently and gives us change. And, if all of a sudden I think it would be great if everybody's products did play well with each other. But I think if I hark back to my original kind of podcast, it's not always the project. Sometimes it's data structures and data not coming together particularly well. And I know if I were my colleagues from other software vendors that do what I do, we all see those same issues. And I think kind of the future of software can go in one of two ways. It can either be, you know, these modular approaches when it does planning and risk and change and cost, and it's part of an ERP system and it's attached to your expenses and it knows when people are going on holiday, you know, that everything in one place. Or we could look at saying, you know, how does a data cube come together, and choose the best of breeds to work with that, and put the focus on making sure that the process and the people know what they're doing with the best of breeds. So I don't know. Well, I think only time will tell, but it would be sad to lose the competition, because it's the competition that drives innovation, and you're not going to get innovation if everybody's using one thing, because there's no, you know, there's no one-upmanship, there's no keeping up with the Joneses, there's no kind of like, oh, look at my sparkly new, because everybody's using the same.
What do you think, Rich?
So I've been down this journey before, right? So when I was at Parsons Brinkerhoff, internally, in order to manage our projects, we had in the UK, we were running a portfolio of like 100, 150 different projects. Some of them as small as a £10,000 afternoon inspection commission in a power plant. Others, you know, a big major program like the East London line. But you know, the company was looking for a one-stop shop portal that could manage all of its projects from an internal perspective, and that's the road that we went down. And ultimately, it was a painful road. I'd like to think that we had some success, but you know, developing that one-stop shop solution is painful. And the problem is with a one-stop shop solution, even when you get to being good, sooner or later, someone else is going to come along with something better. And the minute that you have to try to change horses or, you know, relicense something, it can be very difficult to get out of that relationship with that one-stop shop solution. So, you know, the trend that I see is that big projects out there, like a Crossrail or a TransPennine or a Hinkley or an HS2, they tend to take the approach that they pick and choose the right software applications for the right piece of function and knit them together in a systems architecture with some, you know, business intelligence sitting over the top of them. But consultancy practices, going back to the Parsons Brinkerhoff example, and also, you know, business that I currently work with and others that I've worked with in the past, they tend not to take that approach. They tend to coalesce around, or try to coalesce around one system. And I don't know, I don't necessarily know why that is, but I'm in agreement with Nat that I think, you know, I don't see, you know, the one-stop shop solution being the VHS that beats the Betamax. I think that we'll have good, high quality package solutions that have a specific purpose that will sit inside a data architecture. I think that will be the way for some time to come. Because of course, if you do it that way, you always have the option to switch in, switch out.
Yeah. No, it's. Oh, you got some more
without destroying the whole.
No, I was also going to, so switch in, switch out, but then also inject something net new, because there is always something new. I mean, I'm going to drop a product name in here, but, you know, Fuse was pretty new when Dan brought that out. And it's now not that new, but there'll be another product that comes out that's kind of like, ooh, and you've got to have space in your architecture and in your project and in your process to be able to put in something like a game changer that comes out. So it's not just always swapping in, swapping out. Sometimes you want to put something brand new in there. And
I agree. Yeah, I think that's my premise. The premise is that if the machine learns and you provide the inputs to the machine and things become relevant and new, like I think some companies are still discovering Fuse, even though it's been around for so long, and they're going, oh, this is a great tool, we should use this on future projects. But maybe we should save this for a great debate on systems and tools and where machine learning is going. Maybe get Dev from NPlan and Dan Patterson from Innate and some project controls guys, and maybe even David Pulford if he can make it, and really talk about what would machine learning do to the industry, because I still think it'd be a competitive market. You'd have different types of machine learning perhaps, but the idea would be that a bit like Watson from Iron Man, where you would have someone providing input and then having access to all the information on that company, benchmarks of projects. So we know we spoke to Dev from NPlan. They're doing some pretty interesting stuff with, let's call it machine learning for scheduling. I think that's the first benchmark off the press. This is future. Like when I say future, I mean like it's out there somewhere. But I love to spitball ideas with people who know what they're talking about, and I appreciate your comments, because it's an interesting one to postulate that perhaps maybe one day we have an Alexa in a room and we tell her or him or whatever it is, the machine, what the inputs are and how we want them configured and what we want to look like, and maybe get out of the 4-week rut that we get in, these 4-week drum beats. I'm not sure why we think that's the best way to report, but currently it is. We do a 2-week, right? We do 2 weeks of updates, 2 weeks of getting reports ready. And that's pretty synonymous across all major projects, but I'm not convinced that that's the best way to report. And I think we've had someone else on, what was it, Paul or Al Semonite or someone who talked about whether we could break the business rhythm. I think, arguably the quicker we get information, which we're certainly seeing with technology, the quicker we can report. The only limiting or the only friction on that is quality. And my last comment, I'll hand over to Dale because I'm sure he's got some comments as well, is narrative. So we talk about data all the time, right? When we talk about data, we're talking about charts, figures, statistical analysis, having great performance analysts, Richard, but we don't talk about the narrative. Now, when quality drops, my personal opinion is it's actually around how people describe, one, what the problem is, and two, what they're doing about it. Because obviously we're being indicated there's some performance issue. How do we fix the narrative? And have you experienced quality issues in the storytelling piece on your projects? So Crossrail as well. Rich, I'll go with you first, if that's all right.
Well, definitely. I mean, so first of all, you mentioned how could we ever break the business cycle? We actually talked about doing this in 2017. So, our periodic reporting, we were producing high quality board reports every 4 weeks. But of course, one period every year, no one reads it because it's Christmas. And so, we still produce the report, but, essentially we kind of, skipped a reporting period. And I remember having conversations about why don't we just, move to bi-monthly or even just quarterly reporting. And, there was a reception for that, but ultimately it didn't happen because, we were just in the rhythm and that's how it operated. But we were certainly willing to have the conversation. And I definitely think there are, better ways of reporting. Your question, have we experienced drops in quality of reporting? Well, yes, we have. I mean, several, I think at least 3 times I recall in my time on Crossrail, we had to set projects backwards. So, we suddenly realized that they were not at 75% complete. They were actually only on reflection at 67% complete at best. So, going through the pain of resetting a project without resetting the baseline and forcing the overall program percentage completion backwards because that particular project, we had just been honest with ourselves and had reflected it. But that's part of, what integrity is. You have to call out bad quality when you see it.
Matt, did you want to comment?
I think a lot of clients that we've heard is sometimes it's not the reporting quality that's lost. Sometimes it's the kind of the projects, and it's the projects, the people, or the project's appetite for consuming that kind of project. So there's times I've been on there with clients and they said, but we had this 10 years ago. Why have we not got this now? And just through change of people, change of leadership, change of projects, you know, some good practices have fallen by the wayside, been replaced by something else, that something else maybe never had that same longevity. And so you end up kind of in this reporting cycle where, you know, they tried something new and it didn't work, and then 10 years later we're kind of back to implementing something, and there's always been somebody there that's been there for 15 years that said, but we used to do this. And again, but is change a bad thing? I don't know, because people still want to. So sometimes that report quality, it might not be that it's falling, it's just that it's just changed, and perhaps needs to be changed back to something else.
Yeah, another great points. I think it's very similar to maybe what's happened with COVID, where you know, the working week has changed, and you know, the office presenteeism has changed because of something significant. It's ultimately shifted our entire value set, and now I don't think we'll ever go back to a full working week in the office. Certainly not in Australia. And there are companies now trialing 4-day work weeks. So we are shifting away from the 9 to 5. We are shifting away from always being in the office. Like you said, change isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it might take a massive motivator for the month, you know, the 4-week cycle to change, for example. But really good input, Dale. I've talked too much. It's over to you, mate.
I love it. I'll throw in a few comments there. You spoke about data, and I think it was with Dr. Alexia Nalowik where we spoke about critical thinking, and we were speaking about how, you know, data rich we are, but information poor. And go back and listen to that one. But I think it was your one, Nat, when we spoke about having a tool belt rather than, you know, sort of one size fits all. And maybe it's that playbook or tool belt or toolkit that we need access to go, this project is characterized by X. So what do we apply to this, rather than trying to make it fit in a box? Rich, I think you're trying to do it, but I'm going to call it out straight away. Nat is amazing to work with. I think it was about 10 years ago, I think it wasn't even your direct product, Nat. And you heeded the call. We're like, we can't do this, come out. And there you were. So anyone that's worked with Nat, she is truly amazing. And then, Rich, you teed us up perfectly for the next podcast. We don't often announce the next podcast on the previous podcast, but we're actually speaking to Walt Lipka, the creator of Earn Schedule, on the next episode. So stay tuned for that one, and we'll talk about Earn Schedule and everything we can do there. But I think that for me, the whole takeaway of this entire podcast, and you said it already, Rich, everyone needs a Dave on their project, and I think we need multiple Daves on our projects. So if nothing else, listeners, that is the takeaway. Find a Dave. Doesn't matter who it is. If your surname's Pulford, then that's even better. But like, just get a Dave on your project and everything will be hundreds. So that's sort of my comments. I want to jump into the feature, because this is the real fun bit where we challenge our guests in a fun way. And I'm not going to sort of lead into it, because we've got Martin in the background there, our in-house oracle. So Martin, if you wouldn't mind coming off mute.
I'm suddenly nervous.
We didn't do this last time.
We didn't. It's a surprise for you as well, Nat. But Martin, over to you to explain what happens.
It's all new. It's a little feature we're trialing out. It's called Defend the Indefensible. So it's where I read a statement and you have to defend it for 30 seconds. It's inspired by some of the stuff we've all kind of heard over the years, some of the ridiculous comments you've all probably been privy to at some point in your vast careers. So if you're both willing, I've got one statement for each of you. So yeah, if you're both willing and keen, let's make a start.
You can go first.
This could be a disaster.
Okay, Rich, you have 30 seconds to defend the following statement. The Treasury were far better estimators for mega projects than any engineers or project managers ever could be. Discuss.
Well, of course they're far better estimators, because they know how to actually put an estimate together that will get buy-in from public support. I mean, if you ask engineers to put an estimate together, you'll get something akin to, a real life estimate, but that's absolutely useless to no man. What you really need is a political driven estimate that will win the hearts and minds of people to be able to get projects off the ground. That is how true estimating is done. That's 30 seconds. Got to be right there.
That was brilliant.
Get this man a red bus and a football player.
I can see how painful that was as well. So well done. Thanks a lot. Thanks for being such a good sport there. Okay, on to you, Nat. Your statement. So speaking to project managers is a far more reliable estimating tool for EACs than any earned value management software. Discuss.
It's about gut feel, isn't it? I mean, these project managers, they've got experience, they've done this, they've seen it. And let's face it, narrative and discussion and getting the measure of a person and building your credibility against their range of experience. We've talked about kind of, herd immunity as well as herd knowledge. And if anything, we should always be more believable in who we work with, because we work with them, we rely on them, and human beings discussing stuff together is always going to come out at the right point at some point.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot.
Amazing. Nat, you're not in sales, are you, Nat?
No, I'm not in sales.
Brilliant. That's fantastic. I love that. We could chat for literally hours and hours and hours on many topics. I think the two of you are two of the most passionate people we've had on the podcast, and I really thank you for that. It's been such great fun. As we head to the end of the podcast, I just want to come to each of you for some final thoughts, perhaps to leave the listeners with. I'll come to you first, Nat.
So I'm going to hark on the comment that Richard talked about, that get to know your software vendor. I've been here for 12 years, so I don't kind of like sell something and scurry away into the distance. If I don't deliver, you can still find me. But I think the success for being here for such a long time is that my clients do come and find me, and we work through things together. And the end of my conversation doesn't finish with, and how much software are you going to buy today? The conversation is, what are we going to do today on our journey to success? And I really wish more people would be less threatened about salespeople and more engaging in building that relationship.
Thanks, Nat. Well put. And while we're with you, thank you so much for bringing Rich on, because you were the one that dragged him kicking and screaming to the Project Chatter podcast. No, you didn't. Rich, thank you so much. Any final thoughts from you?
Well, the whole premise of this conversation was around Crossrail being a failed project and why. And so I will reiterate, any project that is 10 years, that is 30% over budget, 30% late, to me, given the huge benefits it's delivering, be gone with you if you're going to call Crossrail a failure. I just won't accept that. But anyone that knows me can connect with me on LinkedIn, and I'm pretty honest and open book about these things, and always happy to share lessons that I've experienced and that are out there for other projects to benefit from. So yeah, keep the conversation going. I've loved being on the podcast. It's been great.
Brilliant. Thank you. We've loved having you, Rich. Really, really appreciate that. Val, any final thoughts?
Oh, Rich, it's great to have you. I think for those that are listening who maybe had some media skewed views on Crossrail, hopefully you've demystified some of that and given them an insight that they might not have had we not had this podcast. And this is truly what Dale and I are trying to do, have people like yourself who are passionate, honest, on the pod to share their experiences about big projects, because there is a lot of interest, but there's also a lot of pressure and there's a lot of misinformation out there. And I think having people like yourself on was great. Nat, it's always good to have you on board, because software is at the, I'm just curious, really. I love to play a devil's advocate. I guess I'm wearing a red jumper for those that are watching, so that's my job. We've got a red and green. We need an amber jumper now, Dale, I think, just to have the rag status, But Nat, it's always good to have you on. You're so passionate and open-minded and thoughtful, and it's great. And Dave Pulford, shout out to you, sir.
He's not even on the pod.
He's not even here, but
yeah.
If anyone's thinking about the Dave joke, check out Dave Pulford, send him a message, give him some love on LinkedIn. Thanks to him as well, and Martin as well. It's been a great pod. Thanks, guys.
It has. Just before we go, ladies and gentlemen, or lady and gentlemen, we have a pop quiz called Tenor. It is a pop quiz. It's a quick one. And if you're up for that, we'd love to take you through it in quick speed. I see some nods. So over to Martin. Go ahead, Martin.
Okay, 10 quickfire questions, all about yourself. In terms of order, I'll go ladies first. So start with Nat, then go to Rich. So yeah, let's make a start. Okay, question 1. What's your morning routine? Nat.
Children screaming at me from their bedroom, "Mummy, mummy."
Rich.
Right. My morning routine: coffee, shower, Teams conference call.
Both pretty hectic then. One a bit more than the other. Number 2, would you rather spend your day with people or technology?
People.
A mixture of both.
Still on the fence. Go on. Got to push you.
People.
Okay. Number 3, how do you deal with stress?
Plan. I'm a planner. I need to plan my way out of stress.
Rich.
I don't deal with it very well. I internalize it and don't talk about it very much. Keep smiling.
Very good. Okay, next. What's the best book you've been gifted?
I can't even think of a book that I have been gifted. I tend to just go and buy my own books, but
So what's the best book you have then?
I read a lot. Ask Richard and I'll come back to you.
Okay. I can answer this. It was Nelson Mandela's Journey to Freedom. It was amazing. I've read lots of really good books, but that one was gifted to me, and it's amazing.
Yeah, brilliant book. You managed to think there, Nat?
No, because I just read like nonsense. Seriously, I pick up a book for how thick it is and how many episodes there are. So some of my book libraries like this long. So that's what's a good book for me.
So everyone that's listening, send Nat a book. So she's got lots of gifted books.
So next time you're on, we'll get an answer. Okay, number 5. If you could choose to spend a day with anyone, past or present, who would it be and why?
This is a really weird one, but what's his name? Blofeld, the guy that used to do the cricket stuff.
Henry Blofeld.
Henry Blofeld, yes, because my other half loves cricket and I have to listen to it on the radio. But the stories that man would come out with and the way that he delivered it, and I just think it's one of those ones that I bet he's got some really interesting stories on stuff. So I would probably choose him.
What a guy. Yeah. Rich.
God, there's so many. I'm going to say Richard Wilson, the actor that played Victor Meldrew. I always thought that he must be one of the funniest people in real life to ever meet. So yeah, I'll stick with Richard Wilson.
Great answers, both. I really like that. Okay, next. What's the greatest bit of advice you've ever been given?
What, don't sit down with a light bulb in your pocket? No. I don't know, there's so much of it. Don't take life too seriously. Kind of, live it day to day. For the planner in me that wants to plan everything out, I suppose that's probably good advice.
I don't mind telling you who gave me this piece of advice. I've always remembered it, and whether it's the best piece of advice I've ever got, I don't know. But when I was working in Balfour Beatty, the director of services, Kevin Craven, I was working for him, and it was actually when I was leaving the business, and he said to me, "It doesn't matter who you're talking to or how senior they are, Rich. Just remember, they always put their trousers on one leg at a time, just like you do." And it just. It's like, right, okay, everyone is equal in the eyes of Kevin, and putting trousers on one leg at a time, it just worked for me.
Great answer. Very true as well. Like it. Okay, next. What's the biggest mistake you've made on a project?
Oh, I definitely know the answer.
Looking forward to these.
I don't know, not talking to people enough, not investing enough verbal kind of communication and relying potentially too much on emails, or how many times do I get halfway through an email and I'm like, do you know what, I'm just going to phone them, I'm just going to ask the question, because there is so much more that you get out of talking to people. So falling foul of technology and moving away from that human interaction.
Very good. Rich?
And a similar thing. I fell foul of technology. I was working on West Coast Mainline, and it was a lot earlier in my career. And I was reading the newspaper one day, and someone had written in really criticising British engineers on the railway. So I decided to write back to the paper. And unfortunately, my email had my auto signature on it. And the following day, they published my response in the letters page, Richard Palczynski, West Coast Mainline. And I got hauled straight into the programme director's office. You do not speak for this programme ever. Got absolutely reamed in front of the whole senior management team for being passionate about defending the nature of engineering in this country. I got lots of nice emails from people on the project saying, well said, Rich, standing up for us. But the program director wasn't standing up for me, nearly fired me.
Wow. That's amazing. I think you won some supporters that day, though, I'm guessing, as well as a few enemies. So
he pulled me to one side in the pub on Friday night and said, sorry about that, but it wasn't, had to be said, was an idiot thing to do. Sometimes you just have to take it.
Yeah, it happens. Okay, next. What would you tell your 10-year-old self?
God, why did I choose to go first on these? I'd say stay with what I wanted to do. So on my first pod, I did all of the art stuff, and I went to university and I did all of the art stuff, and I chose to do what I enjoyed to do. I haven't ended up in a job that's done that, but it did mean that I was chasing something that I was passionate about. And we've talked about passion, and I think involving yourself and continue to say, I want to do that because it's fun, rather than I want to do that because that's going to get me a good job or something like that. I think that's kind of important for kids today, because there's a lot of stress on success and having this for your CV and doing that for school and so on and so forth. If you enjoy it, then you're good at it, and that's a key part of any kind of growing up story, I think.
Yeah, no question there. Rich?
Without doubt, I would go back and tell my 10-year-old self, stop being afraid of breaking the rules. I spent a lot of years as a kid being terrified of either being, told off by my parents, or, being, put in detention at school or something. And I would just go back and say, stop being an idiot. Don't be afraid of breaking the rules. Live your life. Try things.
Great answers. That's really, really good. I think this kind of leads on to what you said before, Nat. What profession other than your own would you like to have attempted?
I always said that if I didn't do sales, I'd love to do project management, because when I was sat with the SIG groups and we talk about STEM and how people got into project management because they came from science and engineering and all of that, I like stakeholder engagement. For me, anything where you get to communicate passion and that kind of sense of coming together and collaboration, I love all of that. So I get that in the job that I'm doing now. But if I wasn't in sales, I'd still want to be doing that kind of success with others and that stakeholder engagement. So if I wasn't doing it on this side of the fence, I'd like to do kind of project management, maybe on the other side.
Yes, it is. Great answer. Nice. Rich? So.
I'd be a vet. Without a shadow of a doubt, I'd be a vet. I've even thought about sacking engineering in and starting all over again. But unfortunately, to be a vet these days is a much longer road than being a doctor. Yeah, it's a tough one to get into. But I love animals, and I'd love to be a vet.
Oh, nice. Okay. Interesting answers there. Okay, final one. If you had to spend £1 million in a day, what would you spend it on?
Diamonds. Sorry, that's an easy question.
Didn't even think.
No, I don't. I'm a girl and I like my diamonds. If I had a day as well, you don't really get much choice, do you? And then I'd give some to charity, maybe.
Get a few diamonds for that. Rich?
I would go and buy a house for cash and pay someone to just fit it all out, and then pop round my sister's house and give her the keys and tell her she can go and move in.
You're so nice. I'm so self-centered.
Oh, brilliant. As Martin was saying, thank you both for being such great sports. It's been so much fun. And thank you for sharing your open candidness, your passion, as we were saying, has been amazing on this podcast. So folks, that is all we have time for on this episode, but it doesn't have to stop here. Support our charities and access blogs. Or if you think you have something awesome to share, visit projectshatterpodcast.com. Don't forget to subscribe on our YouTube channel and your favorite podcast player. Can't even talk. Your favorite podcast player, so you don't miss the next one. A massive, massive thank you to Nat Moyes for coming back again. Thank you, Nat. And to Richard Palczynski for sharing everything he has on this podcast. Thank you all for listening. Till next time, we say stay safe, be disruptive, and have fun doing it. From me, Val, and Martin, it's bye for now.